Okay, conversation was the first interface. It's the most natural way we interact with other people. It's the most natural way for us to interact with systems and technology. Going back through history, we see example of the things we create, and conversation being the way that we want to converse with them, the way we want to interact with them. When technology enters into our narratives, conversation is the interface there as well. This isn't always a good thing. This is an interesting thing because conversations can often confuse people. They don't always know that they're interacting with a system or a bot. And when technology develops sufficiently that we can start imagining things, these things actually coming to reality, we now have to start differentiating the conversations that we have. Oh, this is going to be, this is all weird because it's auto-timing. Once we develop the technologies that make these things real, we now have to start differentiating them from the humanness that we before, sorry about this, it's going to drive me nuts. Space doesn't do it. I don't know why all of a sudden it's doing this. All right. I may just have to keep going back and forth. Okay, in any event, we can look to science fiction as a guide for how we idealize the right kinds of interfaces for technology, because science fiction is augmented reality. It's just another reality, whether it's VR or AR, and it's also the best prototyping tool that we have for prototyping how these technologies should be. Now, throughout science fiction, throughout narrative, throughout history, we have our examples of where this technology we assume could become problematic. And it scares us when these technologies start to have, or we imagine these technologies to start to have a mind of their own or have their own intents and goals. But we empathize really easily with technology. Doesn't have to look like a person, doesn't have to sound like a person, doesn't have to be classically anthropomorphized. We naturally empathize with technological systems. And this book by Cliff Nass and Byron Reeves showed through research at Stanford University how we do that. We don't need a toaster to look like a person or to be named after a person or to sound like a person. Because arguably this is the most popular character in all of Star Wars-dom. Arguably, it's also the most well-acted character. We know that R2-D2 is having anxiety there because we naturally anthropomorphize that interface to that system. We naturally look at something that's totally unhuman-like there and treat it as if it's a social actor. And that's what Byron Reeves and Cliff Nass showed in their research. But when we add voice, that effect becomes even greater. And when we add humanness in the visualization, like here, it becomes even more powerful. And that's why we have to care about these systems as we add bots into our daily lives and into our digital services, because humans are predisposed to treat them like other people and assume that they have the same kinds of goals and intents. Now, there are rare
Junior requesting a second extension on his term paper.
There are rare moments where we do this thoughtfully, where we get it right. But there are too many moments where we just aren't thinking about what the outcomes are, and we get ourselves into trouble. Yeah, it'll go in a sec. Hurry, Linda. Okay. We know all too well that when we get this wrong, at best it's annoying. Right? At best, it's difficult to do, and we don't always do a good job of it. When we get it right, whether it's through fiction or through fact, we know when it works really well. And that's why we need to use science fiction as a prototyping method. This is one of my favorite examples. Oops, that was exactly what I didn't want to do. Does anyone remember Bounty Bear? These can teach us lessons about how we should implement this technology well. Okay. This isn't just about science fiction, it's about products and services that we've been developing for decades now. We put humans into the interface, or we depict the interface as human-like, and it helps us relate, but it also comes with a host of challenges. With this empathizing, we can use technologies as social actors, and that's a really good thing. But it also becomes a problematic thing because it's getting less and less possible for many people to differentiate between fact and fiction, between science fictions and shipping products, and between augmented realities and reality. This is why there's an imperative to figure this out. When you cast the system as a character, it becomes a character in our lives. It becomes really powerful, but it becomes just as problematic as it would be if it were a bad actor, a bad person on the street. So this stuff looks really fun and cool, but it has tremendous importance to figuring out how it fits into our lives, particularly with what it watches and what it does with the data. We all have seen examples like this where these social actors have not, this is not a bot for good, right? It was intended to be one, though. And what happens to this data has become scary. It become dangerous. And there's no standards and there's no ways of controlling these things right now. There are examples, however, of where this is done well, where it can be helpful and even hopeful in our society. And that's what we need to strive for, but we have to do so thoughtfully. GUIs have been around, they've been the dominant interface for over 30 years. And this is, I'm thankful for that, because otherwise, for those of you who are old enough, this is what we used to deal with, right? And when GUIs came around, it exponentiated the number of users, the new kinds of applications and uses, and the kinds of digital services that we take for granted today. Without GUIs, we would never have gotten there. And this is going to happen again. We're moving to conversational interfaces. It's going to be a great thing. It's going to usher in computing services for a whole class of people who have never been able to use computers before or simply weren't comfortable. And these multimodal bots, or multimodal conversational user interfaces, are going to not only help us work and live better, hopefully, if we do this right, and use digital services in a new way, but they're going to also introduce a whole bunch of challenges that we've never seen before. Every single service that you use, every place you have a profile, will soon become a bot, probably in the next 10 years. That's a lot of bots. And we have to be able to trust those bots. I don't know how many bots or profiles or services that you have a profile on you trust, but there's going to be a lot of them. In addition, the kind of data, the amount of data that we're generating for these companies is really valuable, and that value is growing, and the kind of data is completely changing. So there's a new class of data that these front ends to AI, I'm going to go back and forth a little bit here, that these front ends of AI record about us. It's called affective data, and it's all about our emotions. Through voice intonation, through facial recognition, these bots are able to tell when we're happy, when we're not, when we're disgusted, when we're sad, when we're looking for something else. And that is incredibly important for us to be on top of. When we're happy and when we're not. This is the most important data initiatives at Amazon, at Facebook, at Google. They want to know what we're looking at when we're happy. We've never recorded this data, and there's no regulations around this data before. And that's a big problem, a big challenge as I see it. This is what happens when it becomes really scary. This is a real thing. China is now using this data to deny services to people because they are deemed not good actors, right? They're deemed not good citizens. And you don't have to watch Black Mirror to understand this because it's happening today. It's just not happening in this country yet. And all of this is way too important. This paradigm shift is way too critical to allow a handful of global corporations to own all the data and control who gets to see it and what gets done with it. This is the problem that we're trying to solve. Hasn't really surfaced for most people in their lives today because we're all really busy looking at other things, but it's going to be incredibly important. None of the promise of these technologies is going to come to pass unless we figure out a new platform, an independent platform from those FANGs and BATs, right? The 10 largest companies that are deploying these technologies. And no brand is safe. If you have a brand that's not one of these 10 companies, no brand is safe if they're going to be the intermediary, because they're suddenly going to own your customer. When you walk into a Bang & Olufsen store, been a fan of mine since I was a kid in high school, they have a CUI front end to their systems. You go walk over to a button, you press it, and you say, Alexa, put on this music. Whose customer is Bang & Olufsen's now? It's now Amazon's. So this is important for a business reason. If the social stuff doesn't get to you, the business stuff should. Anyway, so we're creating an independent economy based on bot interactions, based on conversational interfaces. Because all of this is too important to leave. Sorry, I know this is really frustrating. All of this is too important to have it locked up in just a few companies. And blockchain makes this really powerful and in some ways kind of easy, because we can put these transactions on a blockchain and they're globally independently verifiable and to some extent controllable, because we can authenticate these interfaces. We can authenticate bots for the first time and then play up good actors and deactivate or play down bad actors when necessary. This solves the authentication problem, and it also solves another problem, which is remuneration for developers. Right now, there are way more bot developers outside of Amazon than there are inside of Amazon, and they're not getting paid as much because the system doesn't allow them to collaborate, there's not enough standards, and they can't work and interoperate with each other or with their clients. But if there were global standards and there was a global economy that was independent of those things, then developers would actually get paid for the work that they did every time that bot runs. Imagine it's essentially the thing that never got built for music. Every time a song plays, the music producer, the production sound designer, the lyricist, the singer, they don't get remunerated every time that song gets played. And in our system, every time the bot runs, everyone that contributed to it gets paid their little teeny sliver of money. That's the view, that's the vision we have for this kind of system. And along the way, we recognize that there's a lot of patents, there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of tools and IP that need to be open sourced in order for this to be workable for developers. And so that's what we're doing as well. We're trying to build a system where ratings and data and remuneration for creative content all get tracked by the blockchain. And geez, everything's happening at once. Get tracked by the blockchain and get remunerated based on the licenses that they set themselves. And then we're building the entire thing in a nonprofit because we want the sole focus of this system to be on building out a permanently independent platform for everyone to use, not just for those few 10 or so global corporations. It's important for us to make sure that this is acquisition resistant so that Facebook or Baidu or someone else can't just come in and buy the whole thing off the shareholders and it's now owned by them. So that's where I'm at. Thank you. We're looking for people to help build this out. We're looking for people who will join us. So I'll be available afterwards at the break if you have questions for me. Thank you very much for dealing with messiness.
Right on. Hold on. This should be given to Nathan just for juggling today's presentation so beautifully. But work he and his team are doing is worth digging into and taking the time to understand. And thanks for saving the world. On behalf of the Virtual World Society, Nathan Shedroff, you're next in medallion. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.